Hi, I'm Nancy Robin, and I want to thank all of you for attending the second event of the Inspired by Ilona Communal Educational Series on embracing all differences. With tonight's topic being cherishing and protecting relationships when family members are on a different path. Tonight's discussion will focus on supporting loved ones who identify as LGBTQ+, and part two, which will be held on December 6th, will focus on supporting loved ones who have chosen a different direction in the Jewish observance. Thank you so much to our esteemed panel, Rabbi Menachem Penner, Dean of the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary at YU, Adeena Penner, Director of Kesher Families, and Gedalia Penner, Cantorial Student at JTS and LGBTQ+ advocate within the Frum Jewish world, and I guess you guys all know they're related. We are beyond thrilled and honored that you are joining us this evening, and can't wait to be enlightened by your experiences, your perspectives, and insights that embracing family members who identify as LGBTQ+ into the Jewish community at large. And thank you, Ann Brosky, for generously agreeing to moderate tonight. My husband, Larry, and I would like to extend our most heartfelt gratitude to our truly amazing committee. Rabbi Shomrei, Rabbi Sarah Markowitz, Ann Brosky, Lizzie Harris, Irene and Robert Gottesman, Amy Robin, and Andrew Levine. We are deeply grateful for your dedication, passion, and creativity. This is really a true labor of love. You're not getting paid very well. And we also want to extend our truly heartfelt gratitude to Rabbi and Sarah Markowitz for supporting this program. Larry and I created Inspired by Ilona as a dedication to the memory and inspirational legacy of our beloved daughter, Ilona Brodman. Ilona was diagnosed at 11 months old with a form of muscular dystrophy called spinal muscular atrophy. There was nothing typical about our daughter's life. We were told at the time of her diagnosis that she had a 5% chance of living to age 2. Ilona defied all expectations and lived a joyful and meaningful and vibrant life until the age of 28, when she passed on July 4th, 2021. We learned so many invaluable lessons while parenting our wise Ilona, and one of her greatest legacies is that she continues to inspire and teach us how to be better human beings. Some of the most powerful tenets we learned was that every child is a gift, no matter what or how they present. Our children's job is not to meet our expectations, but for us to appreciate who they are, and that our embracing and cherishing our children is their fundamental right. As parents, we all have visions and dreams of who we would like our children to be, even before they're born. But what we learned from parenting Ilona is that all our children are precious gifts, and that we are not the designer of their dreams and identities, and that we need to support every element and fiber of their being. So when we learned that our son Scott, at age 14, was gay, our first thought was how to support and give him all the support they needed. And now, at age 22, we feel so fortunate to have a very close and loving relationship. We know from parenting Ilona that his blueprint was his own, and as parents, our sole duty was to ensure that he felt loved and cherished. And we continue to be exceptionally proud of our son and our daughter, who's sitting up front, and advocate for him and hope for increased acceptance of his LGBTQ+ identity in the Jewish world. We could not have found a more esteemed panel with a broad range of experiences and expertise to help elucidate the topic of cherishing and protecting family relationships. We are thrilled to proceed with the evening and hope that you all leave here feeling comfort with new insights and guidance. One last detail before I finish, I want to mention that if we have time at the end, and we hopefully will, the panelists will answer questions. For those of you who are online, there's a QR code that you can scan in and submit your question that way. And for those in the audience, you have a QR code on your seat you can scan it. Thank you very much, and I'm going to hand it over to Anne.
Before we begin the actual panel discussion, I want to take a moment on behalf of everyone here to thank the Brofmans, Nancy, Larry, Amy, and Andrew and Scott for their vision in creating the Inspired by Ilona program. Those of us lucky enough to live in Fair Lawn have learned firsthand from the Brofman family about unconditional love. They were doing inclusion before many of us knew that was a thing. They taught us by example the extraordinary power of inclusion in countless ordinary ways. In an interview published in Sefaria, Natan Sharansky relates that Yirat Shamayim, fear of God, took him a long time to understand. He finally came to recognize that this fear is not connected to God the Creator, but to the image of God in which man was created, Tselem Elohim. Mankind was created to be worthy of that image and to be true to it. Tonight's program truly honors Ilona's memory and our pursuit of being worthy of that image ourselves and learning to see others as Tselem Elohim, made in the divine image as well. Now we'll begin with some questions. Gedalia, let's start with you. If you could tell us about your early years, what it was like for you when you realized that you were somehow on a different path.
Great. Even before Gedalia jumps in, could already mess up the schedule. We just want to honor ourselves and thank the Providence and everyone who put this together and say how honored we are to be able to be in front of the Markowitzes and the Udins and so many of you who I could say I grew up with and to see so many faces. But actually we realized on the way here that maybe first we need to define what the letters that we're talking about stand for. Because that's probably not as well known in the audience, so let's start with that.
Sure.
Give a chance of that, and then Gedalia is going to start with a little bit of his story.
Okay. So, for the purposes of this conversation, people are most familiar with the terms gay, bisexual, lesbian, and trans. Transgender is usually the end of trans that we have these days. Can you hear me now? I'm a singer, I know how to use a microphone. I'm gonna put this right here. So gay would refer to anyone who is male or male identified, that is attracted to people who are male or male identified. Lesbian would be the opposite of that, female or female identified, who are attracted to female or female identified people. Bisexual would be anyone who is attracted to both male and female individuals, and transgender would be anyone who has an experience of the gender that they were assigned at birth not resonating with their current experience, which can mean that they feel that they were born male and identified as female, or vice versa, or it could be somewhere along the spectrum. The term non-binary is a term that you might be hearing these days, which refers to not having a binary experience of it, feeling somewhere in the middle. And then queer is a term that at this point can basically be used as an umbrella term, the way that gay used to be used to refer to people who are anywhere along those lines, and can just refer to anyone who has any sort of variation of experience where they feel that they just don't have a typical cisgendered, opposite of transgender, or typical sexual orientation experience. And the other letters that you might find that might come up in this conversation a little bit might be the A for asexual, which is people who have a different relationship with the level of sexuality that they have, or romantic attraction, or possibly having none at all. Intersex, meaning people who were born in the first place with a body that didn't necessarily fit very cleanly into one category or another. And all of that can go under queer. So queer might be a term that comes up that can mean any variation of experience that is just not typical cisgendered heterosexuality.
Okay.
How's that?
There will be a test at the end.
Yes.
Please take notes. Okay, back to the question. We're so sorry to interrupt. We thought that was important.
So we're going to start with Gedalia. If Gedalia, you could share with us some experiences from your early life, what it felt like for you when you realized you were somehow different.
Sure. So just one experience of many. I was quite aware of my sexuality as I was going through puberty in a way that some people have a certain cognitive dissonance and only really realize later in their life. I was pretty blessed to have that clarity from the get-go. The way that I describe it is that my experience was kind of, I was pretty confidently Jewish on the one hand, being raised as a modern Orthodox Jew, and pretty confidently gay as well, in as much as I was not disturbed by the fact that I found that I was gay. I didn't understand exactly what it meant, but there are people who really have a difficult time once they learn about that, and it really causes them a whole lot of distress. And for me, I was really blessed that to start with, just the sheer fact that I knew that I was gay was not the end of the world in and of itself. And then in high school, these two selves were kind of walking next to each other, and then finally they looked each other in the face. My gay self and my Jewish self, and I went, oh shoot, now what? And that was kind of my experience of learning that I was both gay and Jewish, and that the two combining might not actually be so simple. Shortly after that, I started coming out to a friend or two, and then quite soon I came out to my parents. Jury's still out to say exactly how I did that. We have different versions, different memories of exactly how that happened. But I told my parents, and then very shortly thereafter, my parents suggested that I go to reparative therapy, conversion therapy, both terms basically to refer to the pursuit of trying to change one's sexuality, which has since been debunked by the medical community, but at the time was the reasonable thing that a frum person would do if they were in the situation. And it came completely out of love. And I said yes voluntarily, mostly because I love talking, and there was singing too, and there was nothing else on my mind anyway. It was the only thing that I was thinking about anyway. So I was very happy to find myself in one-on-one rooms with people with PhDs and LCSWs who were qualified, and who on top of their degrees felt that they were qualified, and it was important that they help people change their sexuality. This was an extremely anxious time for me. I would leave school twice a week to go to this therapy, and would come back in the middle of the day and be asked where I went. And in my mind, at the age of 15 or so, there was only one obvious reason why I might be leaving school twice a week, and I had to constantly dodge and think of new creative reasons of why I was leaving school other than to try to not be gay. I was very terrified of really anybody finding out. It was a very anxious, very lonely experience, as it continues to be. The most ironic piece of this experience is that because people previously did not want to talk about this, and are talking about it thankfully more now, but when people didn't want to talk about it, everyone who had this experience thought that they were the first one, the last one to have this experience, and there was no one to talk to about it. So it is the signature of this experience for the people going through it and their families is an incredible feeling of isolation and loneliness. All of which naturally can lead to depression and anxiety and chas v'shalom worse than that. And I was somewhere in between in my own experience. So that was through high school, and then I went to Israel, where I went to study at Yeshiva Shalom, which would have been really lovely, except this was the only thing on my mind that I actually wanted to talk about. The thing about this experience for me, and I know for a lot of people that I know, is it's an incredible stunt on your emotional and personal growth. Let alone the fact that I'm being taught that the Torah doesn't have room for me. So I have Rabbi telling me that there's no room for me in this Torah, and that I'm supposed to sit down with a Rif or a Rush or a Rambam. And how can I really develop a meaningful relationship with this Torah when I'm being told that I don't belong in it? So that's another really important reason why in our community where Torah study is so important, that we really, I think, need to be having this conversation, because queer people have a very difficult time finding themselves in Torah until they understand that they might actually have a place in it. So I went to Israel, which I continued my reparative therapy in Israel. It looked a little different there. There was a retreat, not as bad as some experiences of retreats that you might have heard about, but not great. And continued weekly group therapy sessions with other queer people who are trying to change their sexual orientation. And it was really when I came back from my year in Israel, and I had strong feelings for someone that I was a fellow counselor with in camp, and I noticed that my tefillah was a lot better when I davened next to that person. And what I had been told in reparative therapy is that these are extremely animal urges, and you're just trying to compensate for masculinity that you don't have, and so you're finding it elsewhere. And I just knew after that experience, that was what was the turning point for me, where I said, I feel more shalem and more like an Obed Hashem and more fulfilled when I am around people that I want to find myself in relationship with. And so that was when I basically shut the door on reparative therapy and said, this is not changing, this is who I am, and now I gotta figure it out from there. Now I gotta figure out what it might mean to be an Orthodox LGBTQ person, because that was the only option at the time for me, I felt, was that I wanted to be Orthodox. And so that's, I think, about where we wanna pause for the moment on that.
That's a lot.
Yeah, just a little slice of life. Just a little something.
So, parents, Rabbi and Mrs. Penner, what was it like for you while Gedalia was going through this? What was this period of his development like for you?
I think I'll start the answer. I mean, because it kind of divided into those two different sections. In other words, at the time, we were told that Gedalia could change. We were told by people in the medical community, we were told by people in the rabbinic community that they knew lots of people who changed. Haven't met any of those people since. Unfortunately, it seems that this is not something that necessarily changes. It doesn't mean that a person doesn't have a choice of what to do with it in terms of one's life, but the ability to change attraction is something that we were convinced Gedalia could do if he only wanted to. And we've learned that regardless really of how comfortable or uncomfortable you are with the feelings that you have, they're the feelings that you have. The way we explain it to people is speak to people who are heterosexual and say, can you imagine switching? Could you imagine doing something to make yourself gay? And it's very hard to understand what that would be and how that would work. So we really didn't deal with it. The entire strategy was to kick the can down the road to see if the therapies could work. I don't think we really faced the reality very much until Gedalia sort of did. In other words, until he got to the point. Nothing else mattered, just as Gedalia is saying, nothing else mattered for us at the time in terms of Gedalia's future, other than his ability to change. And as long as that option was there, we just kind of, relied on the fact that hopefully he would. I can say on the driving end of those midday things to Brooklyn, of course, it was very painful for everybody. But again, I don't think we really faced it at first.
So, you hear me?
Hello? Okay, we got it. It's working. Okay, so in talking about this, what we were going through, I'm going to try to address, I guess, also a little bit something that I wish had been different than I had been able to do differently, and that was my ability to really. Is better? And that was my ability to really, really empathize with Gedalia and what he was going through earlier on in his experience than I did learn to do that. When a child comes to you and tells you that they are gay, they're lesbian, whatever it is, you kind of have this feeling that an atom bomb has just been dropped on your family. Like your whole family is just going to implode. And I think my husband also, we were really struggling ourselves with so many different emotions and feelings when Gedalia came out, that it was hard for us to focus on the fact that really this atom bomb, though it was, definitely affecting us and our family a lot, it really had dropped mainly on him. And it took me really too long to be able to just really, really internalize that and what it meant and be there for him in a way that I should have been able to be there sooner. Not that I was completely not there for him, but I just wasn't empathizing as much as I feel I could have and should have early enough. As far as like what we were dealing with and how we were feeling, so there was so much anxiety, guilt, anger. We were nervous about so many things. A lot of it had to do with him, and a lot of it had to do with us and the rest of our family. When a child comes out, you just start to wonder, what does it mean for them and for the rest of their life? What is his life going to look like? Is he going to be able to get married? Is he going to be able to have a family? Is he going to remain connected to our family or not? Kind of like just, fall away? Is he going to remain connected to the community, to our extended family? Is he going to remain frum? Is that even a possibility? Where would he fit? How would that look? What does it mean for the rest of our family? How are the children going to feel about it? And how are they going to deal with it? And how is it going to affect them in terms of shidduchim, people find out, and so many things. We were worried, obviously very worried about, anybody finding out and how everybody would react when they found out. Also, even for us, particularly in terms of, my husband's position in the community and how is that going to be when people found out, like the community, works at YU, like how is that going to go? How is that going to go over? Are people going to judge us? Are people going to see this as a reflection, something that reflects on us, in a bad way somehow? Besides the anxiety, there was also this guilt of like, maybe just we really failed here as parents. Like, was there something that we did wrong that this happened? What did we do? How did we get to this point? And then this, this anger and frustration, I guess, of like, how on earth did I wind up in this place in life? How is this happening to all of us? Like, how could God let this happen? So many overwhelming feelings that you're going through. And we were struggling ourselves so much that it was hard to focus as much as we should have been focusing on, on Gedalia and what it meant for him. And at a certain point, I remember it was a lot to walk around, especially also because we had so much of a fear of anybody finding out that we literally hadn't spoken. We really didn't speak to anybody for so many years. It was just the two of us. We really didn't talk to anybody. That's a really hard thing to walk around with and to hold on to for such a long time alone.
Especially because we thought, sorry. Especially because we thought that it was going to change. So why would you deal with having to change? We didn't tell family. These are my father, stepmom is here in the room. We weren't going to tell anybody because it was all going to be in our past, and so we kind of held it between us.
But at a certain point, it was really becoming a lot, and it was really aggravating. And I remember just one day I told my husband, I said, listen, I am not doing well. I am just not okay. I am not dealing with this well. And, this is not good for me. I can't just walk around with this, anymore alone. I said, it's not good for me. It's not good for Gedalia. It's not good for our relationship. I said, I need to talk to somebody. I need somebody to straighten me out. I need somebody to give me a different perspective. I know there's a different perspective on this. I know there's a better perspective on this. I just need somebody to put my head in that place. I need help. I need to talk to somebody. And I had given it a little bit of thought prior to approaching my husband, and I knew who I wanted to talk to about it. In particular, Rob, that the two of us have a relationship with and know for quite some time, and he knows us pretty well. He happens to also be kind of a go-to person for a lot of individuals in the LGBTQ community, and I knew that Gedalia had reached out to him a bit also when I spoken to him, and I just really felt that he was somebody that I could probably get some good advice from. And I said, I really want to go talk. Would you come with me? And he said, I don't think I'm feeling this as strongly as you are. I don't know if I feel like I need it as much as you do, but if you want to go, I will come with you. We'll go talk. So we made an appointment to go. I think, in retrospect, I think my husband is very glad that he did come with me. And I called it right, Baruch Hashem, and this rabbi was so helpful. And the conversation with him just really, it was able to put me in such a different place. Part of it, I think, was just being able to just get all the emotions out and unload it on somebody, and just be able to talk about it. There's something very freeing about being able to talk about it with somebody other than your spouse and your own Dal Amos in your house. That was, I think, a big part of it. But also, he was able to definitely provide me with a little more perspective and a little bit more of understanding that what Gedalia was going through had nothing to do with myself and my husband and how we raised him or anything that we did wrong. And things that there were a lot of things also that I was particularly aggravated about at the time that we were, going, because I was getting to a point where, though he wasn't really completely out to people, he was changing very much in the way he was dressing and a little bit the way he was acting and kind of like pushing boundaries a bit, and it was really getting to me, and I was having a very hard time with that and angry with that, and he just was able to explain to me that, none of it was a reflection on us, and it didn't speak anything, of us in either way, and it also wasn't him rebelling, it was just him trying to figure out who he was and come to his own, and that we have to just learn to look past it and just love him, that we're, as his parents, that's our only job, is just to be there to love him, and that's it, and just, don't think about the other things, and don't think about what anybody else is thinking. This is your job as a parent, and that's it, and, it might seem simple to people sitting in the room. It was so, I needed to hear this from somebody else, but I can tell you that it was such a pivotal conversation for me, and I really walked out. It took me a little time. I knew I was accepting everything he was saying, and I knew that he was right. It took me still a little bit of time to process everything and to really wrap my head around it, but I know that after that, shortly thereafter, I made a really conscious decision that when I sat down to talk to Gedalia about these issues, I was really going to make such an effort to really be present in the conversations, really, really listen to him, really try to internalize what he's saying and see things from his perspective. It's a different level of listening. It's not just like listening and conversing. I was really, really trying to be able to put myself in his shoes, think about what he was going through, think about how I would feel if it were me, and what kind of decisions I would make if I were him, and how I would approach things, and it made a huge difference. But again, when I look back, in retrospect, I really wish that I had been able to come to that point sooner, in our journey. And it's something that I regret. I did, the best that I could at the time, with not a lot of guidance for a very long time. So that's what we were going through.
So Gedalia, your parents have been so open in discussing the difficulties in dealing with your situation at the time, and your mom even mentioned something she wished she had done differently. Are there things that you wish you had done differently during this whole process?
Well, first of all, I just want to say one of my taglines is "Nachas goes both ways." and that I feel an incredible amount of nachas from my parents, and is very, I have noticed the difference in the way that my mother approaches it. It's very palpable. And when it comes to the question that I sometimes get of what I would have done differently or what I wish that my parents had done differently, my answer to that really is that I don't love that question, because the whole point is that first of all, when it comes to my experience, is that there's a free fall. You're just swimming. The whole point is that you don't have a grip on anything. The whole point is that you don't have an orientation, you don't have the mind to be able to say, oh, if I went back, it completely defeats the purpose of the question, because the whole point is that you don't know where to start. You have no idea where to go. And I think the same thing is pretty much true for my parents, like my mom spoke of, that there was no one to go to, there was no one to talk about. So how would we have possibly known to act any differently? And I appreciate when I hear that question, I just like to look forward. I think I wish that there were resources available for my parents and for myself, more readily available, that clergy people were aware of and that mental health professionals were aware of, to be able to regularly tell people where they're supposed to go when they have issues like this. And so I am just very excitedly forward-looking at all the organizations that we'll, I think, talk about in a little bit, that are available, including the one that my parents started this past year, that I think we'll also talk about a little bit.
And we'll get to those resources in a little while, because that's obviously very, very important. So.
Yeah, let me add just one thing to that. I think that many of the parents we speak to, and we speak to a lot of parents, are responding much differently today, I think, than we did, and that even I think parents did 2 or 3 years ago. One of the things to remember, and again, this is a community event, but it's a community event about family. There are lots of decisions that need to be made in a very careful way about how to deal with individuals who are different in any way as they fit into the community. But a family is not a community. I know you could give some sort of mushroom that a family is a community, but the rules are totally different in a family. I'm not saying that not everyone needs a community to be in, but I am saying that everyone needs a family to be in. And very often we conflate the question of how this should play out in the community with how it should play out in the family. And in the family, the most important thing is to make sure that the child knows that your relationship is permanent, and that it doesn't matter if the child lives up to everything that you said, or that the parent-child relationship goes beyond anything else, and the safety of the child becomes really the first and most important thing, that the child be safe, that the child has someone to talk to. So I think that, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but very often, whether there's a gay parade in X neighborhood, you could think that's a good thing, you could think that's a terrible thing, you could think anything you want. That has nothing to do with your child that comes out to you as LGBTQ. That's the two things. It's very hard for people to separate their politics and their feelings and all those things, but there are no politics in a family. I mean, there shouldn't be. There are at Thanksgiving dinner, and we know what happens. But there shouldn't be, and when they are there, they're dangerous. They're dangerous, because family needs to be family with everything else off the table.
So that also speaks to the question of ideological differences, or as you said, Rabbi, maybe political differences. So clearly, it seems there's a way to agree to disagree, and that family members don't necessarily have to, quote unquote, agree with the philosophy or the lifestyle of their child. But you've made it very clear that you can still have a very strong and good and supportive relationship. Can you explain a little bit about how you put those differences aside?
Just do it because you have to. I mean, I that's really all I can say. I think that basically just, you can disagree on a lot of things, and well beyond, obviously, just this particular parent-child situation. It could be with any of your children or any family member. It's just part of relationships in general, that you might not agree with people that you're very close with on a lot of major issues. But at a certain point, you have to be able to say, come to a decision that you're going to respectfully disagree and just, and I don't know if it's an argument or whatever, there's not so much value in winning an argument if you're going to lose the relationship. So, I think the key is just loving, respecting each other, and not judging each other. We all come from different perspectives and we have different life experiences, and everybody's entitled to see things the way they see them. And at a certain point, we just have to be able to put aside our differences and say, okay, we just see things differently. And maybe we're not going to come to conquer. It's okay. I love you anyway. It's okay.
And if I may add to that, one thing when we were just preparing and figuring out some like really unique elements of this experience of LGBTQ people, not unique only to LGBTQ people, but there's a concept of vertical versus horizontal identity, brought up, I think, first in Nathan Solomon's book, Far From the Tree, where he talks about various experiences of parents and children and divergent different identities. Vertical identity would refer to all of the pieces of your identity that come from where you come from. So in this example, it would be being Jewish. But the thing that we have a slightly more difficult time is horizontal identity, which would apply to the queer community, where you relate to people not from where you come from, but other individuals, based on a different piece of your identity. And what we think might be happening in the miscommunication with some parents and children or their family members around LGBTQ Jewish experience is that it can be very difficult for family that are not queer, but that are Jewish, to figure out where these other values might be coming from. Because you came from us, especially when it comes to parents and children. You come from us, so if you have values that are not the same as our values, where did they come from and how could they possibly have arisen? So one example, for example, is we're talking all about family. And a lot of queer people have an experience of what they call chosen family, which is what we would typically think of as friends, but in the queer community, there's a very strong feeling around the idea of chosen family, which is when you feel that you do not get everything that you need from your family, which can often happen in religious community, that you have the people that you decide whether they fit specific roles within immediate family or not. They are your family. And I know I have friends of mine for whom it is utterly crucial that the people in their life that they consider their chosen family, that they show up for them, that their birthdays are as important as their family's birthdays, that their smachot are as important as their family's smachot. And that's one example where your family, your birth family, your blood family might have a different idea, or your immediate family might have a different idea of how much you should be showing up to family. Was it something I said? And people in the queer community have this different value that's very foreign. And so it's good to know, I think, from the outset that when it comes to conversations between especially parents and children when the children are queer, is that hopefully, ideally, there is minimal conflict because your values are quite similar. And even in the way that my life has continued to look very different than my parents could have imagined, I think my dad put it very succinctly and very well in another panel that he did, where he described that I just kind of needed to find a different Jewish community, just slightly adjacent to the one that I grew up in order to be able to do exactly what my parents taught me to do. I am studying to become a cantor in the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I might have typically gone to study to be a chazan or a rabbi at YU. But even though I am slightly in a different place than my parents might have imagined, it's very clear that I just needed to find myself in a slice of Jewish community where I could bring into the world the values of Jewish leadership that I feel that I got from my parents. And so most of those values, hopefully, are really there and shared. But some of them really will be very foreign to you, and hopefully, if you have a loving communicative relationship where you can figure out where those boundaries lie, there can be minimal conflict, even though the values might not be exactly the same and coming from the same place.
Yeah, I want to speak a little bit about the boundaries, because that's a question that we often get, and a question that we struggle with. Like, the parents are often saying, how much can my child do and still stay in my home? Like, what are the boundaries? What can be acceptable? Can they dress differently? Can they, it's not only a question with LGBTQ, can they violate Shabbos in my home? Can they bring a partner home to the home? And I think that all parents start with, no, this is my line, right? This is my line, and beyond this, we have to have rules in this house. And that's all nice until the child doesn't keep to that rule. And one of the things that I try to tell parents is that parenting is not about winning and losing. It's simply not about winning and losing. And at the end of the day, while Gedalia certainly echoes that the children need to be respectful, and that's a very important value for the children to be respectful, and to understand that even though the child may be going through more, the parents are going through a lot. At the end of the day, when push comes to shove, God has gifted any parent with a child and has given that parent a shlichus, has given them a responsibility to take care of that child. And until, the way I look at it, until you get a specific letter in the mail that God says, okay, you're done, you're not done. And you didn't ask for such a difficult parenting experience, and the child didn't ask to be LGBTQ. We all get different responsibilities and different jobs, and we have to realize that it's just not that simple to say, I'm done. A child is not a privilege that you could say, okay, I don't want that privilege. A child is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that comes with a contract and says that you have to be this parent's child. It's going to be different to parent. You have to be this child's parent, and it's going to be different to parent different kinds of children. But that isn't something that simply is at a parent's behest to say, okay, if you go past that, then you could say that. That's a strategy question. You can strategize all you want, but at the end of the day, if you don't agree, I don't see how that absolves a parent from their God-given responsibility. Probably their most important and precious God-given responsibility to be blessed to have the role of parent.
So I think we've learned already a lot about how families, which are so important, deal with children who have come out as LGBTQ, but we are here as a community, so we're going to shift a little bit to the Orthodox community. And let's start with Gedalia. What ideas do you have about how the Orthodox community can respond differently or can understand better the needs of LGBTQ Jews?
Thank you. Most importantly, what I find is not understood by Orthodox community that I want them to know is that LGBTQ people in the Frum community want to be Frum. As my mom was talking about in terms of relating to my experience, and as we talked about in terms of shared values, I wanted to build a Bayis Neman B'Yisrael. I just wanted to do it with someone else. But I grew up with the values that my parents gave me, just like any other kid. And I wanted the absolute, for the most part, same thing as all of my siblings and all the other kids in the Frum community. We were raised to love Yiddishkeit, to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to love Torah. And that's what I wanted. And that's what a lot of people want. It's not what everybody wants, but that is what so many people want. And related to that, the most baffling misconception that I find in Orthodox community is that when an LGBTQ person comes to their door, comes out to them, is just so strange to me that it is very often interpreted as this swan song of, I'm gay and you deal with it, and I'm coming out and I'm leaving and I'm slamming the door behind me and I'm never gonna see you ever again. And that is so far usually from what is going on there. Usually it took that person weeks, if not months, if not years, to find themselves in that room, able to confess that, not confess, that's not the right word, but to,
Feels like.
yeah, it feels like a confession, it's true, yeah, absolutely. To confide in the usually rabbinic figure, that is their experience, and what they're usually saying, it's a certain amount of bravery, and at a certain point, often desperation, where they're coming to their door and saying, I don't know what to do next. And so I want your guidance about how to stay in the Frum community. And again, it just feels so strange to me that I need to explain that, but it seems to be this huge misconception. When queer people come to your door as a rabbinic figure, or really probably anybody in the Frum community, and share that they come out to you, they're very probably telling you that they want to be in Frum community. Otherwise, they just leave. They wouldn't feel the need to say it before they go. Those are the two things that I think are the most important things that I want Orthodox community to know about LGBTQ people in the Frum community.
So let's turn the tables then and ask either the parents or Gedalia both, what do you wish members of the LGBTQ Jewish community, what do you wish those members understood better about the Orthodox community?
Maybe I'll start, and then maybe you'll continue with some things that can be done. But I think that recently there have been situations where there have been Orthodox institutions and individuals who couldn't exactly find a compromise just yet. And I think both sides have to understand that it's just difficult. It's just difficult. I think that, when I sometimes shuttle, wearing my different hats between the two groups, not in this particular situation that you might be thinking of, but for years I've been sort of shuttling between the different groups, listening to the rabbis and listening to the individuals who identify as LGBTQ. And they're each looking for very good reasons for everything. The rabbis will say, we can accept to this point, but beyond that, these few things we're not going to be able to do. And the LGBTQ members saying, well, if we can't have those things, then it's going to be very painful to be part of the community. And having spent hundreds of hours on both sides of the discussion, they're both right. They're not both right necessarily in terms of a halachic issue or a hashkafic issue, but they're both right that it's really hard to find a middle place here. It's really hard when dealing with a millennial-old tradition to suggest changes. It's really hard to express empathy at the same time as we believe fully that God knows full well what he's talking about, what he's doing. So I think it's important for both sides to understand that it's not just about understanding each other. It's not just about, I think that, as a rabbi, what I try to express is that sometimes if the rabbis give a no, it's because they don't understand. And sometimes if the rabbis give a no, it's because they do understand and they do care. But there is a Torah and there is a God who gave us that Torah, and we believe that although we don't understand everything, it's because he's God and we don't understand him. That doesn't mean we should be apologetic, and that doesn't mean that we should doubt that what he's told us is correct. So sometimes it becomes impossible to find the middle place. And I don't know what exactly the future brings. I'd like to think that the two sides can find a place, but it's going to be complicated. And it's going to involve a lot of conversation, and it's going to involve trying to really understand and respect each other's positions. One thing is for sure, that from the rabbinic perspective, we need to differentiate between an LGBTQ orientation, in which case we have no reason to believe that the person isn't telling us the way that they honestly feel. No reason to suspect that a person is making, if you want to make up something, there's a lot easier things in the Jewish community to make up. I don't mean to sound funny, but we all know that that's true. There's no reason to suspect, the vast majority of cases, to suspect that this isn't what they're feeling. And then the question is, well, what's next? And how do you figure that out? I do want members of the LGBT community to know that we will have to find space for those who want to stay in an Orthodox, typical relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. We're going to have to figure that out. I don't know exactly what that looks like, and I spend a lot of time thinking. But it can't be that if a person has this orientation of some sort, that it can't be that a Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want to have a full relationship with them. It can't be that he doesn't know that they're LGBTQ. And it can't be that that relationship that they have is completely outside of the Orthodox community. So there's a lot of thinking to be done, a lot of work to be done. But it's critical that all of these people, and by the way, we speak to many, many families, it's not just the individuals we're talking about who feel distanced from the Orthodox community. It's their families, it's their friends, it's a very challenging issue for our community. And there are people who are really trying to figure out how do we make this work.
If I may, I just want to just add to what my dad said, that we talk all the time about people going off the derech, and I think that we ignore the part of the conversation where people often get pushed off the derech. It's much more difficult to be having this conversation institutionally about what it looks like for LGBTQ people to be a part of Orthodox community. But I hope that most of us can agree that on a personal level, any person that wants to have an Orthodox relationship of Judaism with the Ribono Shel Olam as an LGBTQ person should be allowed to do that. And honestly, the way, like the metaphor that I use to describe the kind of world that I'm trying to build is to just clear the derech. So that if there is a perfectly wonderful, from Torah-loving kid who is born into the world, who finds that they just love Torah, what I want for them is just a path where they can just roll and just keep rolling. Because there's no reason why a person who happens to be queer, who is in the Orthodox community, shouldn't be able to have an unimpeded derech in which to just continue rolling along their Pashter Yid. That Pashter Yid is like the term that really resonates with me. It shouldn't be that an LGBTQ person has to be like a crazy theologian with these incredibly strong feelings of connection. Like, that's not a lot of Yidden that we have in the world. There are just a lot of Yidden who just are from Yidden because they have a Pashter Yid's relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. They want to be Pashto Yidden and they want to be from. And I would like to see a world where that can be true for everyone, including queer people in the Frum community.
Can you hear me? I'm just going to add a little bit. My husband kind of like just addressed. I'm just going to add and I guess reiterate a little bit, just two things that I feel we could be doing a little bit better, more in the community that would help individuals and families to feel a little bit more accepted in our midst. And there are two things. One is education and one is talking. So when I talk about education, I think it's really important that as a community, we're open to educating ourselves about what this is that these individuals are experiencing. If we're not educated and we don't understand what it is and where they're coming from, then there's no way we can sympathize or empathize with their experience. And I think that, first and foremost is just really clearing up what I think is a huge misconception about LGBTQ, which is that they choose this identity. That they're just like waking up one morning and deciding that, oh, that seemed like a great way to lead my life, I'm just gonna choose that, I'm just gonna be gay, I'm just gonna be a lesbian. And it's really just a huge misconception, and if you think about it, I don't think most of us as heterosexuals choose one day, it's not a conscious decision we ever make, I don't think, to be heterosexual, and I imagine it's the same for someone who's LGBTQ, it's not something that you just consciously decide one day, it's something that you just realize at one point you are, and that's just your reality. And I think that's a huge thing to understand, because again, if you think about it, it's just kind of perfectly choosing this, this is a lifestyle, then there's really probably no way, and certainly as an Orthodox Jew, that you can really be able to show much sympathy or empathy for this person. And the other thing that I think is really important is just being able to talk about this as a community, like we're doing here tonight, and I really feel very humbled to be participating in this forum and to be given a voice here, to speak about it out loud, because, it can't be, I just feel like, this cannot be the only topic of conversation that we can talk about as Frum Jews. Torah has something to say about everything. Torah has an approach to everything. So while we might not have figured out all the answers yet, there have to be answers out there. And I'm definitely feeling, more encouraged. This is not the first place that we've spoken publicly. We have been invited to other places, Baruch Hashem, to speak about our experiences and to share with people. And slowly, I think we are seeing Rabbanim, Poskim, putting, more thought into really figuring out approaches to the situations that arise around this issue. And it's just so important. There need to be approaches. And I know my husband talks about it, it's complicated, it's extremely complicated, and we understand that, but it just affects too many people to sweep it under the rug. Certainly at this point, for a long time, we didn't really know who these people were, but we know who they are, we know who their families are, we know who their friends are, and it affects so many people, and it's just important to be able to talk about it. And I think those are just two things that perhaps as a community we could do a little better so that people feel more comfortable.
I think there's a fear that if we admit that people don't, that if we talk about it, it'll lead to halachic leniency. That if there's a panel like this, that the purpose of the panel is to push for halachic leniency. We're not advocates. We're not advocates. But hiding the truth doesn't help either. We believe that the Torah is strong enough and the rabbinic body is broad enough that we'll figure this out. But the derech won't be to ignore what we know is the truth, that there are people, in fact, a significant part of the population who feel things that many people in this room may not feel. And we need to sort of face it and bring it forward. My wife said sometimes it feels it's the only issue we can't talk about. I mean, there can't be issues that we can't talk about. There are things we struggle with, but there can't be things we don't talk about, especially when so many people and so many families are involved.
I'll just dovetail on that and say that when it comes to the nachas that I shed from my parents, I think what is really unique to my parents' approach, and I think what's unique about how the work that they're doing right now, is that I think I find it in the Orthodox community a whole lot. People feel very uncomfortable expressing, even when it's not so much halachic leniency that they feel, but even if they feel any sympathy for the queer community, they have a lot of difficulty expressing that for fear that they will be perceived as being more halachically lenient or liberal than they in fact are. And I think what's really unique about what my parents are doing is, and just the character of my parents that I really admire, is their ability to step right up to that line, 100% of what they believe in and what they feel, and to feel comfortable expressing that and shouting it from the rooftops. And I think, ironically, I think my dad has previously told me that he gets asked if he feels that he's judged for loving his son openly, his gay son openly. And correct me if I'm wrong, he says that he feels that the opposite is true, that people respect him more for expressing openly how much we love each other, despite all difficulties that we might have in our relationship, that we might have had in our relationship. That's another thing that I would just say to answer, I guess, the initial question from which all of this stemmed, that I would love the Orthodox community to do, is to not be afraid to express what you feel. Because a good number of shuls these days could be very open and welcoming and wonderful places to queer communities if they would just feel comfortable saying that they are as comfortable as they are. I think that a lot of queer people would feel comfortable in the shuls that have a certain level of comfort with the queer community, but those shuls won't even say that because they're afraid of looking more liberal and more halachically lenient than they in fact are. And I would encourage, and it's much easier said than done, but encourage Jews and Jewish institutions to just feel more comfortable expressing that they are happy to have, somewhat comfortable, that they think that queer people should be happy in their walls, that they want to be an open, welcoming place to queer people, even if they don't have all the answers, and even if there are some times when they have to say no. And I think you might find, ironically, that you will be more respected when that is the case, when you stand for what you believe in without fearing for people perceiving you one direction or another based on the things that you state confidently that you believe in.
Adeena, we're gonna have to think of some very nice things to say about Gedalia before you start writing.
I can give you some ideas.
This one's not good. So Gedalia, I think you've given us a good roadmap, at least the first couple of steps on the roadmap. But along the way, have there been people or even institutions who did the right thing, who helped you? And can you be specific about what did that look like, even if it was just a casual conversation or maybe something more formal? How did people do the right thing along the way?
I think it primarily revolves around what I just said. It's just people telling me I don't have the answers, and that makes me feel uncomfortable, but I want you here. I think that you are a Jew and you belong here. And I think the other signature of that reaction is to give queer people the space, the non-judgmental space to navigate their own relationship with Judaism and with Yiddishkeit. Because we are judging ourselves enough. We don't need you judging us too. We have plenty of mixed feelings around our difficulty grappling with halacha and with Jewish community and with relationships with our families. And just trust that we can do that just fine by ourselves. The non-judgmental space to say, I don't have the answers, and I might have to say no at times to things that I don't feel comfortable doing communally or establishing as a norm communally. Please know that you are loved and you are wanted here. And that's the long and short, I think, for myself and for a lot of queer people, what they
It's
want.
perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. I think another thing that related, what my mom was just saying, that we have that in our relationship, and in a way that they often put it, that I know that my dad has articulated it before, is that you'll have a very difficult time having a conversation with your queer kid if this is the first time that you have expressed to your kids that you love Torah and you also love them. Tell your kids beforehand that you love Torah and that you love them, that both of those things are true. Because they will have a very difficult time if you say, I'm queer, and they say, well, we love Torah, so there's nothing that we can do. But truly, if you establish that both of those things are important in your life, then you are starting the base of the conversation where there is love for both of those things. And now that we're in this difficult situation, we can figure out what the balance between the two can reasonably look like because we have all of this love.
Great. So let's move to the resources, and this speaks directly to the Penner's involvement in the community. Rabbi Mrs. Penner, can you talk about your involvement, some of the resources that you've created and that you know about that are helping LGBTQ kids and their families?
Yeah, so actually, I'm gonna turn it first to Gedalia, because we're dealing, and I'll try to explain why, we're primarily dealing with parents, siblings, grandparents. I speak to many, many individuals who are LGBTQ, wearing just a rabbi hat, but first, I think it's easier to get a sense of what's there for the individuals themselves, and then it might be easier to understand the place that we're trying to carve out as far as the parents.
So the first resource to know of is called JQY, which stands for Jewish Queer Youth. Getting like a little, yeah, we like JQY. JQY is an organization that is primarily geographically New York tri-state based, but also services the entire international Jewish community. They have most prominently, they have a warm line, which is like a hotline that you can call if you're in crisis, but it operates during business hours, so that you will reliably know that you will get a call back if you call during a time that someone is not there. And they have a drop-in center that meets in the city on West 30th Street, if I'm not mistaken, which is about 3 hours. And the first hour and a half is just social open time for queer youth to come together and to just linger in a space, to just be around people that are like them, to feel very normal. And there are also mental health professionals that are available during that time and the second half to just take them aside to have conversation if they feel that they need help from a medical professional, somebody who is a licensed mental health professional. And then the second half would be like programming, just targeted programmatic fun. So it's a great time. It meets on a weekly basis. They have other events, usually around the holidays. And they are just the primary resource, certainly in the New York and tri-state area, for any kid just to start off if they need support. There's also Eshel, which is I believe that their mission statement is finding space in the Orthodox community for queer people and their families. They service youth and also adults. They have Shabbatons once a year. They do some support of parents from the perspective of people who are queer themselves and mental health professionals. And so if you're looking for people to relate to specifically about the Frum Orthodox experience, that might be a good place for a person to go. There's also Kesher, which is a more unaffiliated organization for youth that is national in the US, I believe, which is similar programming, the likes of which JQY does. They have Shabbatons and retreats and sorts of things. And then on top of that, every queer person should know that all other queer people in the Jewish community are happy to be a resource to them. We just want to be able to help people the way that we wish that we could have gotten more help than we initially had. And any queer person, Jewish or otherwise really, but certainly Jewish and certainly Frum Jewish, absolutely anyone in the community for the most part, from what I understand, is in the same camp as me, where I might not be the person to help you best, but you can reach out to me at any time. I'm inundated already, don't worry about it. I will help, I will either help you myself or help get you to somebody who will help you. Every Jewish Frum queer person is a resource to you, and you should know that. You are loved and supported by that community.
So that begs the question sort of what we're doing here. And those of you who know my wife and I, the last thing we were interested in doing is trying to start an organization. It's certainly an organization which exposes us and is so open and is so, so what happened was that Gedalia and I, many of you have heard, Gedalia and I did a podcast as part of the David Bishevkin's 1840 podcast. And even before that, I think, it really sped up. But even before that, my wife and I were getting many, many calls. Even though there are other resources. My wife and I were getting many calls. And the question is sort of why? Why were they turning to us? And I think that there is a segment of our community that is looking for perhaps a little bit more of a different perspective hashkafically. And I don't think that's something that we need to be concerned about. I think that this issue is very difficult to discuss without the religious implications that are involved. That's just, there almost needs to be a rabbi on call, because you can't have a 10-minute conversation about these issues without it hitting some religious matter. And having rabbis and rebbitzins sort of as part of the mix is going to be important wherever you're coming from, hashkafically. And we started fielding calls, many too many for us to handle, making ourselves available, Zoom sessions, meeting with parents who were looking for our perspective, hashkafically. And that's why I think within this space of servicing the Orthodox community, there almost have to be different organizations, because people are going to be comfortable with different approaches from a hashkafic and a halachic perspective. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, Kesher Families, which Adeena is the director, Kesher Families was founded in April, and between our different, not since April, but in our different roles, we've spoken to probably in one way or another, I can fairly say hundreds of families. We are unfortunately, I guess you don't really want to talk about right and left, but unfortunately we are seen as, I don't know what we are, but we are seen as the right flank of a place for parents to go. We very much hope, and we're trying to work to have another organization and another organization. The best hope for Kesher is for us to close and go back to our old lives. That would be our organizational goal, is to close and go back to our old lives. But right now, there seem to be people who are looking for the perspective that we're bringing. We would love to see an organization in the Hasidic community. We would love to see an organization specifically in the Sephardic community, because cultural differences make a big difference. But right now, we are fielding many of the calls from, it's hard to describe where in the Jewish community. Some people who are also accessing the other resources. And again, we're talking more the parents and the family. Perhaps also, we're not really advocates. We're not really advocates for community change, we're advocates for community education. And I think that also makes certain individuals a little more comfortable sometimes to pick up the phone. But what we do, what Kesher does, is I think the most important thing that we do is a single 1.5 hour meeting with a set of parents who come to us. We find that as people are starting to know about Kesher Families, and Adeena has business cards here that you can give to people, beg them to call, because we find that we're talking people off the ledge half the time. Sometimes, depending on where the parents are coming from, they're in a pretty good place and they want a little advice, but very often, especially if they're not coming from a more modern Orthodox background, that 1.5 hours is primarily what we can offer to have them understand that their family will go on and life will go on and their relationship with their child should go on, because they come on the conversation not with that attitude that the Ribono Shalom would want them to continue that relationship, with their child. We're going to be starting soon to have parent groups, only because even despite that work, there's just a desire for parents to get together, parent groups led by from mental health professionals. And we do training like this, sort of. This is not a Kesher event, this is a Providence special. But we do training in schools, in shuls, talking to different people, talking to rabbis. We're going to be starting to train even mental health professionals who are not so familiar with the Orthodox community, how this plays out in the Orthodox community. We're just trying to educate. We really feel that the answers are complicated, but it starts with education. It starts with people understanding what this is and how it plays out in the Frum family. And we encourage people to send people our way. We have a website. We have a staff already, Baruch Hashem, of people that help us, other rabbis, other mental health professionals. For those of you who are familiar, probably the person in the field is Rabbi Chaim Rappaport from London, and he'll be joining our organization, please God. Just about to officially announce that. And it's good to have him on board because, then we don't feel like we're, he really knows, and he's met probably with more Orthodox LGBTQ people than anyone in the world. I think he's the one. He's the one. Not that one conversation that we needed, but he was the only real guide for us years ago to what does it mean to have a child who's LGBTQ. And please God, other organizations will start, and then we'll go back to our originally planned lives. But until then, I think this is something that I guess we're supposed to be doing. And we consult with Gedalia a lot, because Gedalia, as you can see, now we feel like we have to say this, but it's just a very special person, and he is very, very dedicated. I would say he is quite the LGBTQ activist, but his activism is making sure that people stay healthy and stay comfortable and have a relationship with God. And that's quite a cause to have activism for. So we're very proud of him too.
Maybe this is most directly for Rabbi Penner, but perhaps for all of you, is there training today? Has training begun in rabbinical seminaries and rabbinical schools? Not speaking to any one rabbinical seminary in particular, of course, but and or what kind of training can you foresee becoming part of rabbinic schooling?
I mean, my poor students have a dean who has a son who's gay, so they get their share. But to be honest, they really are today. Rabbinic training has changed a lot. They need to know a little less about ritual slaughter than they used to. It just doesn't come to us. It's important, but it doesn't often come to a rabbi's desk. And if it did, the rabbi would probably run away if that was brought to their desk. Rabbis today are really on the front line. We try to remind them. We have some of the Gedolim in the world of Jewish mental health, Dr. David Pelkovitz, Dr. Norm Blumenthal. We try to remind the rabbis that they are not mental health professionals. And they don't have that training unless they get it. Many people do now. Many more rabbis are continuing. We have a joint program with FERCAF and Wurzweiler, so many more. But we remind them that they're certainly not mental health professionals, but they are, the rabbis and the Rebbitzins are the front line. That is, more often than not, the first person that the family comes to, very often the individual comes to. On every issue that's out there in the world, it exists in our community. And, there's nothing that Rabbi Yudin did not see. There's nothing Rabbi Markowitz already hasn't seen. There's nothing that the Rebbitzins haven't seen. People assume that rabbis are living somewhat, rabbis and Rebbitzins live somewhat sheltered lives. There's no one who sees more than rabbis and Rebbitzins, because that's the world that we live in. And we have to prepare them for what is out there. And we still teach them that the psak is left for the postscript. And a typical shul rabbi is not going to himself be able to figure out how to deal with such a difficult issue. We hope in the coming years there'll be more guidance, there'll be more understanding, and there'll be more guidance of how to deal with these issues.
I think what's really exciting with opening up the conversation and people feeling comfortable coming out is that as we continue forward in time, the need for that education of the basic understanding of this being an experience and experience that's all around us, they're meeting each other halfway, because it's very difficult for a person my age to be starting rabbinical school and not knowing somebody who is queer and to have some sort of queer experience. So fortunately, the need is becoming less intense because it's just a thing that people know. They just know the sibling or their friend. They're like, oh yes, of course, that's what what a gay person looks like. They can also like Torah. They want the same things as I do. They just want to come to movie night. It's just becoming more, I guess, regularly scheduled programming. It's just a fact of life, and that's something that's really exciting to me. That the education is becoming less necessary formally in the classroom because people are feeling comfortable coming out and talking about it and making it a fact of life that people know.
I think we will have time for some questions. Yes? Panel, do we have time for some questions? One question has come in via our amazing technology. And it's a pretty dicey one. And I don't know to whom I'm asking,
As
perhaps
opposed
all
to the rest of
three
the
of you.
conversation.
Sorry?
As opposed to the rest of the conversation.
Right,
Okay, nothing we haven't
Piece
got
of
yet.
cake.
Easy,
A listener wants to know if any of you can foresee a future in which gay and lesbian couples can be embraced in an Orthodox shul. Which may be more of a halachic question, which I know we don't want to get into.
The question is what the word embrace means, and it's going to be about both sides understanding. It's a question of what embrace is, and how that works. It's a work in progress. I think that there are many shuls already where there is a lot of openness to people who identify as LGBTQ, and even I think it's a little easier in this sense to be gay than to be transgender. I think transgender is I'm not saying it's halachically more difficult, but it's more difficult for the shul to wrap their head around it. I think there's even more prejudice against transgender than there is against gay and lesbian individuals. But I think that there's actually a lot more openness to having individuals who identify this way in our communities and in our shuls. But the question is, what is that line? And what happens when we get to that line? And as I said, in a family, I'm not sure if there is a line. And that's primarily what we're here to talk about tonight. As a community, there's going to be lines. There's going to be some lines somewhere in communities, and communities function different than families. But I think that there will be a place because there has to be a place. And the question is exactly what is that going to look like? I confidently look a 15-year-old. We confidently looked a 15-year-old who was having a meltdown on Motzei Shabbos and we ran over to the house. We confidently looked him in the eyes and said, there will be a place for you. You're 15 years old. That doesn't mean halacha is going to change. Halacha doesn't change. There's going to be a place for you because you're 15 years old and there will be a place for you. We don't know where he'll end up. Right now, he's not talking about getting married to a man. He's not talking about anything. But I said, whatever direction you take, if you want to have a relationship with the Orthodox community, I believe that it'll be there for you. You believe us? It's a tough conversation.
Another listener, before we get to audience questions, another listener wants to know how. Sorry, before we get to the audience questions, someone else tuning in wants to know how parents can address questions from their children when the schools are not willing, or some schools are not willing to address this topic. That was the softball question.
Well, I don't know how to answer it in the context of that. What do we tell parents? Let's say that a sibling comes out, as LGBTQ. What is some of the advice that we give the parents about talking to the kids? One of the things we say is that, first of all, kids are a lot more exposed than we'd like them to be and that we think they are. Right? We almost had a gay married president of the United States, almost. we almost had someone who was gay and married, become president of the United States. It's unlikely that a child is never heard of. That was not a political statement. I'm just saying that that's where the world is today. Right? It was not, in other words, so I don't know. The second thing is that I think that parents need to realize that first of all, being gay is not contagious. You have to say that. Being gay is not contagious. And that when you embrace a child in your own family, sometimes parents say to us, well, what's the message we're sending to our children if we say that, if we allow that, if we still continue to have that personal religion? I said, you know what you're telling your children? That no matter what they do, you'll still love them. I said, that's probably the most important thing you need to tell your children. And I think that parents sometimes underestimate how much the kids naturally want to be like them and just want to fit in and be like everybody else. I said, you don't need to convince, if there's one child in the family who's different, or if you have a nephew who's gay, your 7-year-old, your 10-year-old wants to be exactly like mommy and dad. They're not going to say that and the fact is, the message that you give your children is that it's okay. People are different. People make different choices. Most kids want to be exactly like their parents. And seeing that their parents are loving of people who are different is at least as important a message as don't do that and don't think about that, especially in the world today.
Do we have time for some audience questions? Or they're only coming in? Okay. Oh, here we go. I'm going to just read this as it was written, okay? How do we deal with our grown children who don't want their young children exposed to gender issues? By not accepting the gender choice of one of my grandchildren with gender issues, my grown children are making the parents of that child feel rejected and torn from the family.
Do you have any harder questions? Why am I getting all this? Okay.
I'm a visual.
I'm used to fielding these out of whatever questions, so I don't mind taking it. The most difficult situation we find in families, and again, we deal with more families than you can imagine are dealing with this. And even though most people don't know, many of you don't know what Kesher families is yet. But despite that, most people find a way, many people have found a way to get them. The most difficult situation in a larger family is a sibling who has young children. That is the most difficult. We find that on the whole, grandparents are much more fine with it than the parents expect. Because we're grandparents, are not as dumb as you think they are. And very often they'll tell like a 90-year-old grandmother, and someone, of course he's gay. You didn't know he was gay, what are you talking about? And second of all, that the grandparent-grandchild relationship is even stronger in a certain way than the parent-child. And the grandparent wants, there's very little that would make a grandparent imagine breaking off with one of their grandchildren. That's just and those of you who are zochet to be grandparents, you understand that. It's just a different relationship. That's why you're always spoiling them. The biggest challenge is the married siblings who have young kids, because it's very difficult for them to think clearly, because really they have a panic about their kids and what this is going to mean for their kids. It's very hard for them to think clearly. And at the same time, I think that they should have the right to allow their children to be exposed to what they want their children to be exposed to. That may not be a popular opinion, but parents at the end of the day do have the right for their own children to decide. The consequences for that is many families that we deal with that are just split. They can't be in the same room ever. And we'll get the grandparents saying, does this mean that we'll never have our kids together ever again, and our grandchildren again? And that to me is just something you got to figure that out. So we generally try to talk to those parents, and again, we try to explain to them that you don't have to explain everything. That being gay, I know this is an unpopular opinion, but being gay is not about sexuality necessarily. And being married is not about sexuality only. And there are ways, and we're happy to try to help people. We got advice as to how to, how to speak to, Gedalia's younger brother about it. In most cases, it's not followed by an immediate decision on behalf of that nephew to just go off the derech and to, this and that. As I said, exposing kids at the right age to people have different choices. People make different choices. People do different things. Mommy and Abba do this, but other people do other things, and that's okay. That's okay. But it is probably the most painful, I think, right? I would say it's the most painful family situations that we get involved with are in that exact situation.
Here's another question about an LGBTQ individual who does identify as an Orthodox Jew, is trying to find their place within the Jewish world. This goes to all three of you. Do you feel a Reform or conservative temple might be a better place? Or do you feel modern Orthodoxy needs to make room for those individuals?
Let's agree to disagree on this one. You go first.
I mean, I want to say this first and off the bat, is to reiterate what I said about creating an unimpeded derech, is that any person who either started out from or did not start out from and wants to be from Orthodox should have the space in order to be able to do that. And I want to build a world where in the modern Orthodox community, the Yeshivish Orthodox community, and the Hasidic community, we can find a place where any person who wants to be Orthodox can be Orthodox, because everyone deserves. It's very difficult because it's so community-based. It's so dependent upon the community that you surround yourself with and live out a Torah life with. And so it is extremely difficult institutionally. But I want to fight for the world where any queer person can be Orthodox, can find a place. At the same time, the thing that is very difficult to talk about with queer people and with their families is that you might find that you will either have to or want to transpose slightly the Jews that you affiliate with. Is that you might find yourself more comfortable in an environment that is more accepting to varying degrees of the people that you surround yourself with that you think deserve to have a certain amount of respectable treatment. And it is extremely difficult because I know that for myself and a lot of people growing up Orthodox, it's really, really difficult to imagine that there are other communities that have legitimate, authentic relationships with the Kadosh Baruch Hu and systemic Jewish ideology and theology that could be authentic and resonant with your experience. And I know for myself that finding myself at a conservative institution to study to be a chazan was the right choice for me. And that is something super, super important that honestly, I mean, even in the LGBTQ Frum conversation, that this is pretty new, even I think for us to say out loud and for me to say out loud. But I want to be having the conversation around the Frum community, that exists outside of those that consider themselves Orthodox. And honestly, it goes back to the question that we were talking about ultimately whether we think that there will be space in the Orthodox community for LGBTQ people. There's the question of how did you say it exactly? The question of how you define Orthodox. And the thing is that I think that we are heading, I think especially around LGBTQ issues finding themselves to be the hot topic of the moment, along with feminist issues and issues of women in Jewish community. I think those two issues are driving us to what I hope is a really beautiful place where we are finding different ways that we organize as Frum Jews, where there can be places where people find themselves having a resonant Frum experience and community, and also being able to be fully themselves. And I think it is also really, really important to have the conversation around that being okay, and that being a beautiful thing potentially. And that alongside those people who identify themselves as Orthodox community, that if there are queer people who want to find themselves there, then they should also have a place there. Because that is also important to some queer people to be identified as Orthodox and to be able to be themselves in Orthodox community. I think both of those things are true. And I'm very interested in continuing that conversation around.
So I have a different approach.
Really? Yeah.
I have a different approach. I think it's important enough, even at this late hour, to share a different approach, because I think it's a different approach, and it's interesting to consider. I have a fellow in my office. This is most of the conversations I have every day. I had a fellow in my office a few weeks ago, and he was asking exactly this question. Will I be, if I decide that I'm going to have a partner, will I be able to daven? Will I be able to have a place in the Orthodox community? And I said to him, what exactly is Orthodoxy? What exactly is an Orthodox community? I said, your relationship with God isn't Orthodox or not. It consists of 613 mitzvahs and a lot of stuff that the rabbis add and a lot of customs. And what you do with each one of those pieces has nothing to do with where you decide to daven on Shabbos morning. I said, let's say, I said, there probably will be a shul that you feel comfortable davening, even if you take that choice. I'm not encouraging the choice, but you're not giving me that choice. You're saying you're gonna have a same-sex partner. There probably will be an Orthodox shul. But I said, let's say there isn't an Orthodox shul for you to daven. Are you telling me that where you're gonna daven for 2 hours in the week is gonna determine your entire relationship with God the rest of the 7 days of the week? So where is that coming from? I think this idea of orthodoxy, I think, is something that we play. Most of our relationship with God plays out when nobody sees us. Most of our relationship with God plays out when nobody sees us. We have created a very shul mentality that my Judaism is exactly associated with the exact shul that I go to. But whether all of it other than most of another Morlot have nothing to do with the particular slice of community that I associate with on Shabbos morning. So I don't disagree with what Gedalia is saying. Being comfortable is something that is ultimately important for us. It's difficult to thrive in an environment where I don't feel comfortable. There's no doubt about that. But I do encourage that to take that question and sort of take it apart. There is no such thing as orthodoxy. There's a God. Whether you decide to act this way or that way, he's still God. You still have a relationship with him. You can't choose out of one or the other. You do the best you can. And you take it from there.
Wow, I want to thank our panelists.
Let's hear another round of applause. This was absolutely fantastic. There's so many people, Nancy thanked the whole bunch of people for putting this together. After sitting here for the past 15 minutes and listening to all this, I know it was more than 15 minutes. But time flew. Thank you, Gedalia. Thank you, Rabbi Penner. Thank you, Adeena Penner, for sharing your family and your family ideas with all of us. A few other things. Let me thank Nancy for leading the effort. For Amy and Andrew and Scott for being our inspiration. And most importantly, Ilona for inspiring us to embrace people with all differences. Thank you. A few housekeeping notes, okay? We would love for you to You can ask more questions, we'll distribute them, see if anybody wants to answer them. But please go to contact information and register. We would like to build a mailing list, number one, to inform you of future events, but also to solicit ideas from you for future events. Thank you, Janusz, I don't know if you're still here, for working so hard. We hope your journeys go well. And I'd like to remind you of the next event, will be Tuesday, December 6th, right here. The subject will be supporting loved ones who have chosen an alternate direction in their Jewish observances. We have three wonderful speakers, but it's our own local Rabbi Larry Worthwax, and a little bit further away, Dr. Shoshana Pupko, and also Rabbi Menachem who will be joining us. He's from, I think, the Nefrat, up at the Tikva, and he will be here too. And please come back, okay? We hope by the time you're come in December, this room will be completed, okay? And you'll find the ability to spread the word, how wonderful the Shomrei Torah looks again, and come here and we can celebrate Simchat. Marriage will take place in the sanctuary as soon as we're finished here. Anybody else have to thank? Thank you everyone for showing up, and to Nancy and I will sleep. Nancy and I will sleep a lot better tonight.